The revolving doors spun slowly, pulling Marcus Bennett into a world he had built yet now entered as a stranger. The marble floor beneath him gleamed like polished ice, catching the light of chandeliers that hung like golden crowns overhead. Bellhops in tailored uniforms moved briskly across the lobby, their voices low, their steps confident. At the far end, a grand piano whispered a soft melody, the kind meant to remind every guest that they had stepped into something extraordinary. Marcus walked forward quietly, his sneakers squeaking just slightly against the gloss of the marble. His jacket was worn at the elbows, the color faded from years of use. A backpack, not a sleek leather briefcase, hung over one shoulder. To the other guests scattered across the lobby, he looked like a man out of place. Someone passing through, not someone who belonged. And that was exactly what he wanted. He took a slow breath, letting the familiar scent of polished wood, fresh flowers, and faintly perfumed air wash over him. This was his hotel, his empire. Yet no one in the room knew it, not the concierge who glanced his way and quickly turned back to smile at a man in a tailored suit, not the doorman who had barely nodded when Marcus entered, saving his widest grin for the wealthy couple arriving just behind. Marcus's eyes studied the room like an architect inspecting the foundations of a home. He wasn't here to admire the crystal chandeliers or the velvet drapes. He was here to see something more important. He wanted to see how the staff, his staff, treated the kind of man he once had been, ordinary, overlooked, and too often judged before he could open his mouth. Inside, his heart beat steady, but there was a tension in his chest. It had been decades since he was the struggling young man knocking on doors for a chance, dressed in clothes not much nicer than these. He remembered the house. The way security guards used to watch him in stores, the way receptionists would tighten their smiles, as if his very presence was an inconvenience. He had worked his way through that fog of judgment, fought tooth and nail to build a life so solid no one could deny his worth. And yet, even now he could feel the ghost of those moments pressing on him, whispering reminders of how easily people believed what they saw on the surface. He shifted the strap of his backpack and walked toward the check-in desk. His shoes carried him with quiet confidence, but every step felt deliberate, almost theatrical. He was playing a role, but the emotions were real. The sting of being underestimated was not a distant memory. It was a scar that still burned whenever the wrong eyes lingered too long. A couple in designer coats breezed past him, wheeling sleek luggage, their voices bright with excitement. The receptionist's face lit up instantly, a rehearsed but convincing smile spilling across her lips. "Welcome to the Bennett," she said warmly, her tone dripping with practiced charm. Marcus stood only a few feet away, waiting, invisible. He didn't interrupt. He didn't clear his throat. He let the moment stretch, testing the silence. Because in that silence lay the truth he had come here to uncover, whether his hotel was built on more than luxury and marble, whether it was built on respect. And as he waited, the weight of his disguise pressed heavier on his shoulders. No one knew who he was. No one recognized the man behind the empire. To them, he was just another guest, or maybe not even that. Marcus folded his hands calmly in front of him, but inside, he braced himself. He knew the real story was about to begin. The receptionist's laughter drifted like a melody meant only for others. Marcus stood just a few steps away, his presence unacknowledged, as if the marble beneath his feet had swallowed him whole. He shifted slightly, leaning his backpack against his side, patient but observant. Every second that passed pressed a sharper edge into his silence. At last, when the couple with the designer coats walked away, their key cards shining in hand, Marcus stepped forward. The receptionist's smile didn't carry over. Her face cooled into something neutral. No warmth, no sparkle. "Yes?" she asked, her tone clipped, her fingers still hovering above the keyboard as though her attention might return to something more important at any second. Marcus nodded politely. "Good afternoon. I'd like to check in." His voice was calm, steady, carrying the faintest trace of command that years of boardrooms and negotiations had carved into it. Her eyes skimmed over him like a quick scan of a receipt, jacket worn, shoes ordinary, backpack instead of luggage. In those few seconds, he felt her decision take root. She didn't see a guest. She saw someone questionable, someone who didn't belong. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, the words more like suspicion than a question. "Yes." Marcus slipped a folded paper from his pocket, a printed confirmation. He placed it gently on the desk. She picked it up, studied it, then glanced at him again. The doubt in her eyes was louder than her words. From the corner of his vision, Marcus caught another employee at the concierge desk whispering to a colleague. Their eyes flicked toward him, then away, their mouths curling into smirks. His chest tightened, not from surprise, but from recognition. It was the same look he'd seen years ago when he'd walked into rooms that people thought he didn't deserve to be in. Behind him, a line was forming. A man in a tail. Ordsuit tapped his foot impatiently. The receptionist's body language shifted, suddenly eager to move Marcus along, to make space for real guests. "Sir, we'll need a credit card," she said, her voice sharper now, businesslike. Marcus reached into his pocket and handed over a plain debit card. Nothing gleaming, nothing embossed with elite membership. Her eyebrow arched before she slid it into the machine. For a fleeting second, he thought she might accidentally mishandle the process, but the screen blinked green. Approved. Her lips tightened. "Your room will be ready shortly. Please wait in the lounge." But she didn't offer him the champagne flute that a waiter carried over to the next guest. She didn't hand him the scented towel. She didn't summon the bellhop with a smile. To them, Marcus was just someone passing through, barely tolerated. And still, he said nothing. He collected his room card quietly, slid it into his pocket, and turned toward the lounge. His steps were unhurried, but each one carried the weight of revelation. Every gesture, every look, every withheld courtesy was proof. As he lowered himself into a velvet armchair, the chandeliers sparkling above him, Marcus knew the test had already begun, and the cracks in the empire he had built were showing. The question now was simple. Would the cracks be small enough to patch, or wide enough to bring the whole illusion of luxury crashing down? Marcus sat in the velvet armchair, its cushions sinking slightly beneath his weight, but comfort was the last thing he felt. Around him, the lounge buzzed with polite laughter and the quiet clinking of glasses. A server in crisp white approached the table next to him, placing down a tray of sparkling champagne for a couple draped in designer clothing. Their smiles lit up the room. Marcus looked down at his empty table. No server came his way. No one even asked if he wanted water. He folded his hands, the room card resting between his fingers, and watched the stage he had built with his own sweat turn into a play where he was cast as the outsider. It didn't take long before the front desk manager appeared. A woman in her late 30s, sharp suit, hair pulled back tight, her heels clicking like a gavel, striking judgment with every step. Her name tag caught the light, Victoria. She walked toward Marcus with a measured pace, a small crowd of curious eyes following her approach. "Sir," she began, her voice firm, carrying enough volume to make sure others could hear. "Can I help you?" Marcus glanced up, his expression calm. "No, thank you. I'm just waiting for my room." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. She glanced at the backpack at his feet, then at his jacket. "Waiting for your room?" she repeated, as though the words themselves were suspicious. "Yes," Marcus said evenly. "I checked in a few minutes ago." Her lips pressed into a line. She didn't ask to see his card. She didn't check the system. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, the authority in her voice rising. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave this area. This lounge is for paying guests only." The words struck the air like a slap. Heads turned. A couple nearby exchanged startled looks. Someone stifled a laugh. Marcus leaned back in his chair, not moving, not flinching. "I am a paying guest," he said quietly, his voice carrying the calm weight of a man used to being underestimated. Victoria folded her arms. "I'm not going to argue with you. If you don't leave now, I'll have to involve security." A murmur ran through the lounge, guests whispering, phones sliding discreetly from pockets to record. Marcus caught the movement of a young woman across the room holding up her phone, her camera fixed on him. His jaw tightened, not with fear, but with a strange, simmering patience. Moments later, a uniformed security guard strode toward him, tall, broad-shouldered, his walk purposeful. "Sir, we need to step outside," the guard said, his tone rehearsed, as if Marcus were just another problem to be removed. Marcus rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He picked up his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and looked Victoria straight in the eye. Her chin tilted upward, convinced she had won. The guard's hand gestured toward the glass doors. Marcus didn't resist. He walked calmly through the lobby, his sneakers tapping against marble that suddenly felt colder than before. Guests shifted aside, watching, some with pity, some with silent amusement. And just like that, the man who built the empire was escorted out of its doors, treated as though he had no right to stand in the world he created. Outside, the city's air hit his face, brisk and biting. He stood still for a moment, the gleaming hotel lights shining behind him, his reflection faint in the glass. Inside, he could see the same guests sipping champagne, laughter continuing, life moving on as if he had never existed. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The cool night air wrapped around Marcus as the glass doors closed behind him with a muted thud. He stood on the steps of his own hotel, the empire he had poured decades of his life into, cast out like an unwanted guest. The city hummed around him, cars rolled by, heels clicked across the pavement, laughter drifted from the street cafes. But to Marcus, it all faded into a distant blur. The humiliation burned hotter than the neon lights above. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, steadying his breath. His heart wasn't racing. He'd faced worse battles in boardrooms and in life, but the sting of what had just happened was sharper than anything he had anticipated. He had come here undercover, yes, but he hadn't expected the rejection to cut this deep, not after everything he had built. Through the towering glass windows, he could still see the lounge. Victoria stood proudly by the front desk, her posture radiating authority, while guests glanced at her with approval, mistaking her arrogance for professionalism. The security guard lingered near the doors, arms crossed, watching Marcus as if he were a threat instead of the man who signed his paychecks. Then he noticed it. A young woman inside, sitting near the lounge, her phone tilted discreetly toward him. She was recording. Her eyes met his for a brief second, wide with sympathy and a spark of outrage. She knew something wasn't right. And Marcus realized this wasn't just his humiliation anymore. The story was already escaping, slipping into the digital veins of the world. He leaned against the cold stone pillar just outside the entrance, the glow of the chandelier spilling out onto the street. The weight of his disguise felt heavier now, pressing against his chest. But under that weight, something else stirred, a resolve sharper than steel. For a moment, memories pulled him back. Nights sleeping in his car because no landlord wanted to rent to him. Days walking into meetings where people assumed he was the delivery man, not the entrepreneur pitching ideas. Every smirk, every dismissal, every door shut in his face, they all rushed back in the silence of that moment. And now, here he was, facing the same contempt in a palace he had built brick by brick, dollar by dollar. His hand slipped into his pocket and found his phone. He pulled it out, the screen's glow cutting through the night. His thumb hovered, hesitation flickering for only an instant before resolve hardened in his eyes. He dialed a number he knew better than his own, the direct line to his office upstairs. The phone rang once, twice. Then a crisp voice answered, "Mr. Bennett's office." Marcus straightened, his voice calm but commanding. "Tell them Marcus Bennett will be in the lobby in 2 minutes." The receptionist on the other end stammered, caught off guard. Yes, sir, right away." Marcus ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket with slow precision. Through the glass doors, he saw movement ripple across the lobby. Heads turned. Staff exchanged frantic glances. Victoria's confident stance faltered, her lips parting slightly as confusion and dread washed over her face. The silence outside was suddenly electric, charged with the weight of the moment about to unfold. Marcus pushed off the pillar, squared his shoulders, and walked back toward the doors. The man they had thrown out was about to walk back in, and this time there would be no disguises, no silence, and no mercy. The glass doors parted as Marcus stepped back into the lobby, the same marble floor gleaming beneath his sneakers. Only this time the air felt different. Conversations hushed. A ripple of silence spread like a wave, pulling curious eyes toward him. Victoria was still standing near the front desk, her confidence wavering, her posture no longer as crisp. The security guard shifted uneasily, his arms loosening from their rigid fold. A hush hung over the room, heavy with anticipation, as if everyone sensed something monumental was about to break. Marcus's strides were unhurried but purposeful, each step echoing in the cavernous lobby. He walked straight to the reception desk where Victoria forced a smile that trembled at the edges. "Sir," she began, her voice softer now, "there seems to have been—" But Marcus cut her off, his voice deep, commanding, steady enough to freeze the room. "Is this how you greet your guests? By humiliating them in front of strangers? By assuming they don't belong?" Victoria's throat bobbed as she swallowed, fumbling for words. I didn't realize." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "No, you didn't care. That's the truth, isn't it?" The tension was thick enough to choke. The guests who had been watching quietly now stood taller, their phones raised, recording every second. Somewhere in the corner, a flash went off. The story was no longer confined to the walls of this hotel. Marcus straightened, his hand slipping into his pocket. He pulled out his phone and dialed again, pressing the speaker button. The line rang only once before a voice answered, crisp and respectful. "Mr. Bennett, yes, sir. We just received your message. Are you in the lobby?" A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The murmurs turned into a buzzing chorus. "Mr. Bennett?" Guests exchanged looks. Staff stiffened. Victoria's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Marcus locked eyes with her, his voice calm but laced with fire. "Yes, I am Marcus Bennett, and I've just been thrown out of my own hotel." The words hit the air like thunder. The room seemed to stop breathing. A waiter froze mid-step, a tray trembling in his hands. The concierge at the far end let out a faint gasp, covering his mouth with his palm. Victoria staggered back a step, her composure unraveling in front of everyone. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't know, I swear." Marcus raised his hand, silencing her. "That's the problem. You didn't know. You didn't even try. You looked at me and decided I was less. You judged me by my clothes, my skin, my silence, and you threw me out of a place I built with my own hands." His words carried across the lobby, echoing off marble and glass, sinking into the ears of every person present. Guests nodded, some clapping softly already, unable to hold back their approval. The young woman with the phone recording earlier zoomed in, her live stream comments flying across the screen. The weight of the reveal settled in, heavy and undeniable. Marcus Bennett, the man who had been humiliated, mocked, and escorted out, was the very owner, the name engraved on the gleaming gold plaque at the hotel entrance. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted entirely. The silence in the lobby cracked open as Marcus turned, his eyes sweeping across the marble hall he had once envisioned as a sanctuary of elegance. Now, it felt like a stage, every chandelier spotlighting the truth he had forced into the open. The guests stood like an audience, phones lifted high, recording history as it unfolded. Victoria's lips trembled. "Mr. Bennett, please, if you'll just let me explain." Marcus raised his hand, not in anger, but in finality. His voice was calm, but every syllable landed like a hammer. "There is nothing you can explain that will change what everyone here has already witnessed." The security guard who had escorted him out shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. The receptionist who had ignored him earlier stared at her hands, her face pale. Around them, whispers grew louder, guests murmuring words like disgraceful and unbelievable. Marcus stepped forward, placing his palms gently on the check-in desk, leaning just enough that his words cut through the room. "This hotel was built on my belief that luxury isn't only about marble floors and chandeliers. It is about dignity. It is about respect. If a man who owns this empire can be treated like dirt because of his clothes or the color of his skin, then tell me, how do you treat the strangers who walk through these doors? How many stories like mine have already been buried because no one was here to film them?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unanswerable. Gasps rose. Guests shook their heads. Some clapped softly, the sound echoing like the first drops of a storm. Marcus straightened, his presence filling the space. "Respect is not optional. Not here, not anywhere. And those who cannot understand that have no place in my company." His eyes locked on Victoria. She flinched as though the weight of the entire lobby pressed against her chest. "Mr. Bennett," she wailed, speared, her voice cracking. "Please, this was a misunderstanding." "No," Marcus said firmly. "This was discrimination, plain and simple, and it ends tonight." A murmur of agreement swept through the guests. Phones tilted higher, capturing Victoria's face as her mask of authority shattered into fear. Marcus turned toward the crowd, addressing not only the staff but also the strangers whose videos would soon travel the world. "From this moment forward, we will be implementing immediate reforms. Mandatory cultural sensitivity training, stricter hiring practices, and an open-door policy where any guest, no matter how they look, can report mistreatment directly to my office. This hotel will not just shine on the surface, it will shine where it matters." Applause erupted, loud and unrestrained, filling the lobby until it drowned out every whisper of doubt. Guests clapped, some even cheering. The young woman live streaming wiped a tear from her eye as the comment feed exploded with praise. Victoria's voice quivered. "Please, I didn't mean." Marcus's gaze was steady, unyielding. "You're finished here. Security, escort her out." The same guard who had once marched Marcus outside now turned to Victoria, hesitation flickering before duty overtook him. He placed a hand on her arm, guiding her toward the door. Her protests dissolved into silence as the applause thundered louder, sealing her fate. And in the center of it all, Marcus Bennett stood tall, not just as a CEO, but as a man reclaiming his empire with truth as his weapon. The reckoning had begun. The sun had barely risen the next morning when the world already knew what had happened inside that glittering hotel lobby. Clips of Marcus standing tall, declaring his identity, had flooded every corner of the internet. Hashtags bearing his name trended across platforms. News anchors replayed the footage, their voices brimming with awe. Strangers from continents away weighed in, some in outrage, others in admiration. But inside Marcus's office, a sleek corner suite overlooking the city he once roamed in worn shoes, the man himself sat quietly, his hands folded, watching the storm unfold on a muted screen. The applause, The viral explosion, the global headlines, none of it surprised him. What struck him deepest was the hundreds of comments pouring in. I've been treated the same way. They look at you, decide who you are, and strip your dignity. Finally, someone with power stood up. Every story shared beneath his own felt like an echo of his past. He remembered the nights he had been forced to sleep in bus stations because hotels turned him away. He remembered the stares, the assumptions, the quiet humiliations he swallowed because he had no choice. Now, he wasn't just a man reclaiming dignity for himself. He was holding the door open for thousands who had suffered silently. That evening, Marcus called for a press conference in the grand ballroom of the same hotel where it had all begun. The room overflowed with cameras, reporters, and guests who had witnessed the scene firsthand. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, but the true brightness came from the eyes fixed on him, waiting. He walked onto the stage with the same calm stride he'd carried in the lobby, but this time, no disguise. A tailored suit hugged his frame, a quiet symbol of the success he had earned, but it was his expression, steady, human, resolute, that commanded silence. When he spoke, his voice was low and firm, carrying the weight of truth. What happened yesterday was not just about me. It was about every person who has ever been told, in subtle ways or in blatant actions, that they don't belong, that their worth is tied to their clothes, their accent, their skin. A hush filled the room. Cameras clicked. This hotel empire began as a dream, Marcus continued, born from the struggles of a boy who was once turned away from doors just like these. I promised myself that if I ever built my own, every door would stay open. Yesterday, that promise was broken, not by me, but by those entrusted with this vision, and that cannot and will not stand. His eyes burned as he looked across the room into the lenses that would carry his words far beyond these walls. Effective immediately, reforms will sweep through every level of this company, not as a gesture, but as a law. No guest will ever be judged at my hotels by what they wear, where they come from, or the color of their skin. Not while my name stands on the front doors. The crowd erupted, a roar of clapping and cheers, not polite applause, but raw human approval. And yet Marcus wasn't finished. He leaned closer to the microphone, his final words cutting through the storm like lightning. Luxury is not marble and gold. Luxury is dignity, and dignity is not reserved for the rich. It belongs to everyone. The ballroom shook with thunderous applause. Guests rose to their feet, reporters dropped their professionalism to clap along, and strangers online cried behind their screens. In that moment, Marcus wasn't just the black undercover boss who had been kicked out of his own hotel. He was a symbol, living proof that justice can bloom in the unlikeliest places, that truth can turn humiliation into triumph, and that one man's stand can echo across the world. The shocking reveal had already gone viral, but what came after? This movement, this vow, this shift was bigger than any headline. It was history in the making.